So in other
words, they understand more than they can say.
अनन्तरं तेनैव प्रकारेण भवन्तः अपि संस्कृतेन संवादं कुर्वन्तु।
The concept of linguistic minority in India is a relational one, and none of the definitions captures the essence of all kinds of linguistic minorities that the national planning and language planning has thrown up in the country. Self-definition by a group of people is important to understand the idea of minority. Self-definition, or one who regard themselves as a minority, can arise out of numerous reasons, such as a distinctive group identity they fear is eroding, the feeling that socially or economically they are subordinate to others, or that they suffer from discrimination, etc. The focus of this lecture is to give a definitional understanding of what constitutes linguistic minority, nature, characteristics, and scope. To give a global perspective, the definition of a minority as given by the United Nations will be briefly discussed, along with the case of minority languages in India. Now let us move to linguistic minority as a relational term. Commonly, linguistic minority is understood as a group of people who are a minority in a specific society and who speaks a minority language. Speaking French in the United States would be an example of linguistic minority. Here, in this example, what is implicit is the place where the language is spoken. The idea of a minority language is that it is a language spoken by a minority of population of a territory. Such people are termed linguistic minorities or language minorities. This understanding denotes relational or comparative criteria of defining a linguistic minority as a relational term. The United Nations recognizes around 200 sovereign nation states, and an estimated number of roughly 5,000 to 7,000 languages are spoken worldwide. It follows that the vast languages in every country in which they are spoken. Some minority languages are simultaneously also official languages, including the Irish language in the Republic of Ireland. In the case of India, although Manipuri is a linguistic minority in Tripura, it is one of the official languages of Tripura. Likewise, some national languages are often considered minority languages insofar as they are the national language of a stateless nation such as Palestine. Now let us move to self-definition and claims. People who do not share what they regard as the central symbols of a society invariably view themselves as a minority. It is not simply that a community lacks power, but rather that the symbols of authority, the values that are propagated from the center, and the culture that emanates from the center are viewed not as theirs. However, the problem of self-definitions carries certain limitations. If we understand the term linguistic minority as a socially negotiable concept, then a community that regards itself and is regarded by others as a minority may under some circumstances cease to be a minority, while other communities may become minorities. For example, in the United States, Italian Americans, Polish Americans, and Hebrew-speaking Jews once regarded themselves as minorities. They were the linguistic minorities, but are now seen by others, or even sometimes by themselves, as ethnics, in spite of being linguistic minorities. The term minority has come to be reserved for those who are disadvantaged, who belongs to the category disadvantaged minority, as distinct from ethnic is politically and socially negotiable. Now let us see what the United Nations talks about the minorities. Efforts by non-dominant groups to preserve their cultural, religious or ethnic differences emerged with the creation of nation-states in the 18th and 19th centuries. The recognition and protection of minority rights under the international law begin with the League of Nations through the adoption of several minority treaties. When the United Nations was set up in the year 1945 to replace the League of Nations, it too gradually developed a number of norms, procedures and mechanisms concerned with the minorities. In particular, the 1966 International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the 1992 Declaration of the Rights of Persons belonging to the national or ethnic, religious and linguistic minorities. Hereafter in our lecture we will just use United Nations Minority Declaration, recognizes and protect the rights of persons belonging to minorities. The United Nations believes that the promotion and protection of rights of minorities require particular attention to be paid to issues such as the recognition of minorities' existence, efforts to guarantee their rights to non-discrimination and equality, the promotion of multicultural and intercultural education nationally and even locally, the promotion of their participation in all aspects of public life, the inclusion of their concerns in development and poverty reduction processes, disparities in social indicators such as employment, health and housing, the situation of women and the special concerns of children belonging to minorities. Adopted by consensus in 1992, the United Nations Minority Declaration in its article number 1 refers to minorities as based on national or ethnic, cultural, religious and linguistic identity and provides that states should protect their existence. A special subcommittee on the protection of minority rights appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Commission in the year 1946 defined the minority as those non-dominant groups in a population which possesses a wish to preserve stable ethnic, religious and linguistic tradition or characteristics marked different from those of the rest of the population. According to a definition offered in 1977 by Francisco Capote, Special Rapporteur of the United Nations Subcommission on Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minorities, a minority is defined as a group numerically inferior to the rest of the population of a state in a non-dominant position whose members, being nationals of the state, possess ethnic, religious or linguistic characteristics differing from those of the rest of the population, and so, if only implicitly, a sense of solidarity directed towards preserving their culture, tradition, religion or language. In most instances, a minority group will be a numerical minority, but in others, a numerical majority may also find itself in a minority-like or non-dominant position. We can talk about the examples of the blacks under the apartheid regime in South Africa. It is also important to keep in mind that in many countries, minorities are often found to be among the most marginalized groups in society and severely affected by, for example, pandemic diseases such as HIV/AIDS and in general have limited access to health services. Now let's talk about the Indian experiences of the linguistic minorities or minorities in general. To have an understanding of linguistic minorities in India, let us first of all try to look into the aspect of minority language in the country. The two terms minority language and linguistic minorities are invariably interrelated. Now let's see the minority languages in India. In the definition of minority provided by the United Nations, two features such as non-dominant and different from the rest of the population are generally shared by the minority languages of India. The definition points out that a language receives its minority status due to the minority status of the speech community to which it belongs. The Constitution of India recognizes 22 languages as scheduled languages. They are listed in the Schedule 8 of Indian Constitution from Article 343 to 351. Those languages which are not included in the scheduled languages, we can simply term it as the minority languages. At the time the Constitution was enacted, inclusion in this list meant that the language was entitled to representation on the Official Languages Commission, and that the language would be one of the bases that would be drawn upon to enrich Hindi, the official language of the Union. The list has since, however, acquired further significance. The Government of India is now under an obligation to take measures for the development of these languages such that they grow rapidly in richness and become effective means of communicating modern knowledge. In addition, a candidate appearing in an examination conducted for public service at a higher level is entitled to use any of these languages as the medium in which he or she answers the paper. However, the Constitution does not provide a clear criterion for defining minority languages. Here we are talking about the general aspect of India. The Supreme Court of India in the year 1958 presented a parameter for defining a minority language as the language of the minority community. However, this parameter is not applicable at the national level because, as Saklader, a renowned linguist, has noted, there is no linguistic group in India which can claim the minority status. Hindi, the official language of the Indian Union, is the language of only 1/3 of the total population of India. This parameter turns the numerical majority language into minority languages. Kashmiri, for example, which is spoken by around 53% of the total population in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, is not a state language. Instead, Urdu is the official language. Moreover, Urdu, the official language of Jammu and Kashmir, is spoken by less than 1% of the total population of the state. Similarly, English, the official language of Meghalaya, is spoken by around 0.01% of the total population. Other parameters have been proposed based on the dominance or power, like this power we can relate it in terms of political, economic or cultural of the languages. Languages lacking political, economic or cultural power tend to be included in the list of minority languages. A good example is that of the tribal languages, speakers of which constitute around 7.08% of the total population of India. These languages lack political, economic and cultural power at the state or national levels. Therefore, they belong to the category of minority languages. In contrast, Sanskrit, which is perceived as a language of the cultural heritage of India, is not labeled as a minority language. Similarly, English, though numerically a minority language, is not viewed as such owing to its high economic value at the national as well as the international level. Now let's move to state reorganization and linguistic minorities about the status. The large-scale reorganization of states in the year 1956, according to the concentration of languages in different parts of India, led to the formation of linguistic minorities in India. Although the policy behind the reorganization was to minimize the number of linguistic minorities, it created new minorities as no state was completely unilingual. Speech communities are distributed across state boundaries, like this is a truth. Therefore, an official or majority language in one state could become a minority language in another state. For example, Telugu is an official or majority language in Andhra Pradesh, while it is a minority language in the state of Tamil Nadu. The report of the State Reorganization Commission in the year 1955 recommended that constitutional recognition should be given to the right of linguistic minorities to have instruction in their mother tongue at the primary school stage, subject to a sufficient number of students being available. Here, after the reorganization of the states in 1956, Article 350A and 350 Clause B were included into the Constitution. Article 350 Clause 1 states, "There shall be a special officer for linguistic minorities to be appointed by the President." Again, Article 352 states, "It shall be the duty of the special officer to investigate all matters relating to the safeguards provided for linguistic minorities under the Constitution and report to the President upon these matters at such intervals as the President may direct, and the President shall cause all such reports to be laid before each House of the Parliament for the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha and sent to the government of the states concerned." At the same time, Article 30 in the Indian Constitution defines the right of minorities to establish and administer educational institutions. Article 30 Clause 1 states, "All minorities, whether based on religion or language, shall have the right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice." Article 30 subclause 1A states, "In making any law providing for the compulsory acquisition of any property of an educational institutions established and administered by a minority referred to in clause 1 we talk about above, the state shall ensure that the amount fixed by or determined under such law for the acquisition of such property is such as would not restrict or abrogate the right guaranteed under the clause." Further, Article 30 Clause 2 states, "The state shall not, in granting aid to educational institutions, discriminate against any educational institution on the ground that it is under the management of a minority, whether based on religion or language." The linguistic reorganization of states has a definite bearing on linguistic minorities because protection under Article 30 is available not only to the linguistic minorities sharing the majority languages of the states, but also to speakers of the numerous languages that are not represented by any particular state on its own. Now let's move to issues of linguistic minorities in India. It's a reality that there are many divisions in the Indian society. Division because of the language, it's one of the divisions to reckon with. Most of the languages in India belong to four major families, namely the Dravidian, Indo-Aryan, Austroasiatic and Sino-Tibetan. At present, around 325 languages are spoken throughout the country, out of which only 22 are scheduled ones. With such a large number of languages, it is logical that there will be a large number of languages which are spoken only by small groups of the total population. The Constitution 103rd Amendment Bill in the year 2004 proposed to grant constitutional status to the National Commission for Minorities and ensues a change in the way minorities are specified. The Cabinet reportedly approved a proposal in May 2007 to define minorities statewise in line with several Supreme Court judgments, the most notable judgment being TMA Pi. For the purpose of this legislation, minority will be specified as such in relation to a particular state or union territory by a presidential notification issued after consultation with the state government. This will be in addition to the 5 minorities Muslim, Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists and Parsis referred to in the National Commission for Minority Act 1992. The concerns of its linguistic minorities in India are different. We can list 4 sets of problem areas. First is the case of Urdu language. Professor Imtiaz Hasnain of Aligarh Muslim University states that although language may not be a determinant of socio-economic backwardness, or there may not be direct correlation between religious backwardness and corresponding linguistic backwardness, states' discriminatory policies vis-a-vis Urdu language has been one of the major reasons for Muslim educational backwardness, particularly in North India. Urdu speakers have called for establishment of Urdu as an official second language of the state in which they live. There are large number of Urdu speaking communities in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. In these states, an overwhelming majority of Muslims claim Urdu as its mother language. Some minorities speaking unrecognized languages have demanded statehood, like this is the second aspect. This demand is often met by those linguistic groups concentrated in a particular region of a state where the group has strong presence of its own distinctive identity and when they feel threatened by chauvinistic attitude of the majority population. The demand of statehood in the case of Meghalaya and Mizoram from Assam was, for example, among other political and economic reasons, the imposition of the Assamese language. The third set of linguistic minorities in India comprises those who speak an official language other than the language of the state in which they live. These minority languages concentrated, for example, in Assam, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Punjab, Tamil Nadu and West Bengal. The list can go on. Since these minorities are not regarded as sons of the soil, they are often the target of political groups that demand preferences for local people in employment and in education. In some instances, most notably in Assam, there have been demands that the linguistic minorities leave the state and return to their motherland in the 1980s under the leadership of All Assam Students Union. The demand received political support from Assam Gana Parishad under the leadership of Sri Prafulla Kumar Mahanta, who later became the Chief Minister of Assam. The state of Nagaland is an interesting case of complex linguistic minorities. In this state, all communities are linguistic minorities, for there is no principal language. It is the only state in India to be noted to have legislated the official status of English, although in de facto term it is also the official language in some others. There are more than 65 tribes in Nagaland is speaking their own dialects. Nagamese, which is a commercial language, is a mixture of Hindi and Assamese. In other words, English is the sole official state language. As a result, there are no political problems ensuing out of language issues. Now let us examine the three language formula. The Official Language Act 1963 established Hindi language as the single official language of India from 1965, with English as an associate or additional official language. Such an arrangement was the recipe of massive demonstration and self-immolations in Tamil Nadu and subsequently stretching to many states. In order to satisfy the conflicting claims of various languages groups in the country, the three language formula was evolved during Nehru's regime. The formula was enunciated in 1968 Language Policy Resolution. The students of all secondary schools in India were required to study as compulsory part of the school curriculum the following languages: A. The regional language and mother tongue when the latter is different from the regional language. B. Hindi or in Hindi speaking areas another modern Indian language, preferably of South Indian group. C. English or any other European language. In the year 2013, the Implementation Committee of Education Ministers on the three language formula agreed that students passing out of higher secondary schools must have adequate knowledge of at least three languages. These are the regional language or the mother tongue, Hindi or any other Indian language, and English. The committee expressed the view that the general pattern already laid down in respect of the three language formula should be implemented by all states. In regard to the Hindi speaking region, the committee also stated to have agreed that since Hindi was covered under Part 1, Part 2 language under the formula should be another Indian language which are spoken and not a classical language such as Sanskrit, which had close affinity with Hindi. We can say that broadly there are two ways of defining linguistic minorities. First is the relational or contextual definition, and second is the self-definition. While the former can be treated as something conferred by the observer, the latter can be understood to be more political. Both, however, pertain to entitlement and rights, and the element of power is embedded in both the cases. The United Nations emphasizes on underscoring both the subjective and objective criteria in the identification of minorities as well as protection of the minority rights. In the case of India, it can be stated that the Indian linguistic minorities are the products of state policy. The Constitution of India does not define as to who the linguistic minorities are. However, the Constitution has provided safeguards for them. Hence, the definition of linguistic minorities is generally taken for granted as a non-common sense fact than a concept to be defined or identified.